Hilchos Chametz Umatzah Perek Chamishi, the laws of Chametz and Matzah, chapter 5. Today we have a fascinating chapter. First we talk about food mixtures. Which mixtures will become Chametz, which ones will not become Chametz, which mixtures are permitted to make on Pesach and before it, which ones are prohibited. Then we go on to talking about making matzah, which is the only grain-based food that we're allowed to have on Pesach. And we conclude the chapter with the discussion of hag'alah, or hachshara, koshering utensils that were used all year round for use on Pesach. So it's quite an involved chapter. Let's get right into it. Aleph, the Rambam begins, Ein osur mishum chametz ba'Pesach. There is no food prohibited as chametz on Pesach, ela chameshes minei dagan bilvad. Only the 5 types of grain. The 5 types of grain that are recognized by halacha, by Jewish law, as grain. Those are the only ones that if mixed with water, they'll become chametz. Vehem shnei minei chitim. They are 2 types of the wheat family. Shehin achita v'hakusemes, wheat and spelt. Ushleisha minei asoirim, and 3 grains, members of the barley family. Shehin asoira, barley itself. V'shibel shual v'hashifain, and oats and rye. Aval hakitniyos, but legumes, kigun eiras v'doichan, like rice and millet, upailim v'adashim v'chayetze bahen, and lima beans and lentil beans and anything like it. Ein bahen mishum chametz. They don't have inherently the characteristic of becoming leavened, becoming chametz. Rather, even if you were to knead rice flour and those similar grains with hot water, which we'll learn later in this chapter, hot water is more conducive to becoming chametz. V'kisahu bivgadim, and you covered it with clothing, this little dough, afterwards. Ad shenispach k'may batzek shehechmitz, till the dough rises, as though it were an actual dough that became leavened. Harei ze mutar ba'achila. By law, it's permitted to be eaten on Pesach. She'ein ze chimutz ela sirchain, because it's not leavening. It's simply a decay of the flour. It metamorphoses into something else, not chametz. Now, as a matter of fact, today we know that kitniyot is one of the major things that divides Ashkenazim from Sephardim. Many people do not eat kitniyot on Pesach. But that's not because of a chametz issue directly. That's because, as we know, many generations ago, they used to store different members of the kitniyot of legume family together with wheat flour. And so there arose confusion, and there became different ways that there was mix-ups, and kitniyot became involved with chametz. So the sages said, you know what, forget all kitniyot. But by biblical law, what the Rambam is communicating to us here, that we should know that the only grain which could turn into chametz is those 5 types of grain. Beis, chameshes mini dagon elu, even if you have the 5 types of grain, there's another prerequisite, and that is that it has to be mixed with water specifically. Im lasham b'mei peres bilvad b'lo shum mayim, if you were to knead the flour made from these grains in fruit juice without any water, le'olam ein boin l'dei chimutz, they can also never achieve leavening. Ela afilu hinichan kol hayoyim ad nisbach habatzech, even if you will leave it all day and the dough will rise, mutar ba'achila, it's permitted to be eaten. Fruit juice does not leaven, it simply causes the flour to decay, like the legume flour, the rice flour, etc. Does the same thing. What's considered fruit juice? Yayin, like wine. The chalav, milk, also goes into that category. Udvash and honey, v'shemen zayis, olive oil. Tapuchim, rimainim, apple juice, pomegranate juice, and anything like it. Mishar yenos, ushmanim, umashkin, including all wines, oils, and liquids. Anything essentially besides for water goes into the category of mei perot, of fruit juice. And if they're the ones that are containing the mixture with the grain, it doesn't become chametz. V'hu, the Rambam again repeats, that's provided. Shelo yis'ariv bahen shum mayim ba'ilam, that no water at all mixes with the grain. V'mis'ariv bahen mayim kolshu, but if a tiny drop of water mixes into a massive bowl, let's say you have wheat flour and apple juice, and you put a tiny drop of water, that makes the entire mixture potent and able to become chametz. Hare'elu machmitzin, they do become leavened, and if the dough is allowed to rise, it's chametz. Gimel, ein mevashlin chitin b'mayim. We're also not allowed to cook wheat in water. In other words, it isn't just making a dough in the proper standard fashion that makes chametz. There are other ways of mixing grain with water that are forbidden. No cooking wheat in water. Could go in rifais, like grits. V'loi kemach, no cooking flour in water. Could go in levivais. Levivot in modern Hebrew is like latkes. But levivais in halachic Hebrew means balls from dough, or balls that contain flour and water. Classic example, there you have grits on the right side, and on the left side you have knedlach. Matzah balls. Okay, I know it sounds funny, matzah balls. It's not really matzah, it's actually chametz. But matzah balls, the point is dough balls. those are also not allowed. They're forbidden mixtures that create chametz potential. V'im bishel, if you did cook the grain or the flour in water, is a chametz gomer, it is complete and total chametz. V'hushi yizbaku b'tavshel, it's provided that the grain actually splits open in the process of being cooked. That's how you know that it became chametz. Ein kailin es habatzik b'shemen ala machavas. We also may not toast or fry a dough in oil on a pan. But if you have bread, fully made bread, or toasted flour, then you can cook it. Because the cooking process that's done afterwards will not allow it to become further chametz. If, this is a caveat to the earlier case, where you cannot cook flour in water. He says if you heated up the water very, very much, and then you threw in the flour, it's called chalita in halacha, scalding. Hareze mutar, it's permitted. It's because when the flour hits the water, since the water is so incredibly hot, it cooks the flour immediately, leaving it no chance to become chametz. Nevertheless, says the Rambam, and he'll repeat this later in the chapter again. It is accepted custom in Babylonia, in Spain, in the entire Western diaspora, lesser davar zeh, to forbid this method of scalding. As a decree, a worry, perhaps you may not heat up the water very, very well. Again, the whole thing is conditioned on the fact that you're going to heat up the water super, super much. But if you don't, you lose the whole power of the scalding. So since the rabbis were worried that maybe you may not heat it up so much, so they forbade all types of scalding. It is, however, allowed to cook grain or to cook flour in fruit juice. Because again, the whole idea of flour mixing with fruit juice can never become chametz in whatever recipe you make it. Kneading it, cooking it. A dough that was kneaded with fruit juice, if afterwards you went ahead and cooked it in fruit juice or toasted it on the pan with oil, it's allowed. And again, the underlying principle is fruit juice never can turn into proper leaven, proper chametz. Hey, Carmel, a roasted grain, which typically was singed by fire and then immediately ground. It was singed to make it better in the grinding process, and you immediately grind it. The flour created from this roasted grain that's crushed can also not be cooked in water. Even though we said before that if you have proper toasted flour, you could cook it in water. Here, it was just shortly singed. You have to be worried. Perhaps it didn't burn well in the fire. The original fire didn't take away all potential of it becoming chametz. Which would therefore turn out that you're going to actually make it chametz when you cook it. When you prepare new pots, moilelin doesn't actually mean prepare. Moilelin is the term for a process which was used in preparing new pots. New pots that were created in those days from earthenware and clay, there was a worry about holes, pores in the material, and so what they would do is they would prepare this little porridge, mixture of barley and water or a whole type of little dough, cook it in the pot, and that was supposed to seal many of the pores. So the Rambam says if you're doing so in relationship to a utensil that you want to use on Pesach for things that are not chametz, so when you do this to the new pot, ein mevashlin bohen ela matzah afuya shechazru v'tachanu oisa. You can only cook in these utensils matzah that was baked originally and then reground. We call this today matzah meal. Aval kemach kali, but simple toasted flour, osur, it's forbidden to use in the process of this procedure that you do to the pots. Shamalei kaleho yafeh, perhaps again you didn't toast it well, and in the process of this cooking it's going to become chametz. You're now going to have a utensil with chametz, and certainly that cannot be used on Pesach. Vav ein boilelin es haseoirin b'mayim b'Pesach. We cannot stir barley in water on Pesach. Barley is very soft. Barley becomes leaven, chametz, very quickly. V'im balal, if you did stir it, im rafu, if the barley corns softened so much that if you were to put it on the pan, normally used for preparing chalot, yisbaku, they would split open immediately, and then they are considered forbidden, it's already chametz. If upon examination you see it didn't reach that level of weakness, that level of softness, and the barley corns are still permitted to be used, they're not considered to be chametz. Zayin, hachitim, wheat kernels. Mutar livla lo'isan b'mayim kedei lahasir suban. You're allowed to stir them in water to remove the chaff, to remove the bran. V'teichanin miyad kederech sheteichanin haselas. And you grind it right away as you would grind regular wheat flour. Ukvar noagu kol Yisrael b'shinur v'eretz hatzvi. U'b'sfarad u'va'arei hamayrav. All Jews have already began to customarily treat this type of procedure as forbidden. The Jews in Babylon, the Jews in Eretz Hatzvi, the land of the desirous land. It's Israel. It's also called tzvi, which means a deer. The Talmud says because a deer, when it's alive, its skin can hold its flesh. But if you skin a deer and try putting it back into the skin, it won't fit. So to Israel, it holds the Jews. But if the Jews go to exile and they come back, it won't really fit. So that's called Israel. Uvisfarad, the Spain, Ariamaya, the western cities of the diaspora, they already have a custom, not to stir wheat kernels in water at all. Perhaps you might delay this process, and it's going to become staying too long, and it's going to become chametz. You have a cooked dish, you made a pot, you made a dish. You look inside and you see some barley corn, some wheat kernels. It was cooked in the process. Im nisbaku, if the grain pieces, the kernels, split open, everything becomes forbidden for use on Pesach. Chametz has mixed in. But if the grains didn't split open, you take the grains out, the kernels out, burn them, and you can eat the rest of the dish. Because grain that has simply been stirred but not split doesn't become complete and outright biblical chametz. It's only forbidden rabbinically, and so in this case where you observe that it didn't split, take it out of the dish, eat the rest of the dish. Now we move on to the laws of making matzah. Because it says in the Torah, ushmartem es hamatzah. This is an expression in the Torah, you should guard the matzah. Guard the matzah implies something active that you should be doing while preparing the matzah. You should be guarding them, you should be watching them. Kiloymar, which means to say, says the Rambam, be very careful with the matzah, guard it very carefully from any vestige of becoming chametz. Therefore, the sages examining this verse said, you know what, it's very appropriate for a Jew to be extremely careful with all the ingredients, 2 ingredients, flour and water, all the ingredients of the matzah. So first with the flour. A person must be very careful with the grain that he eats, that he's going to eat from on Pesach. That no water should come into contact with it after it's been cut. So that no chametz should be able to attach itself to it. This is what we call today shmura matzah. Shmura means guarded. The wheat has been guarded since its harvest, never to come in contact with any water. Grain which got soaked in a sea, in a river, or water fell on it. The same way you can't eat it, you can't keep it. I sell it to another Jew, let him know this is grain which has come in contact with water, so he'll eat it before Passover. If you're selling it to a non-Jew before Pesach, don't sell it in bulk. Sell a bit to each non-Jew. So you'll be guaranteed that it'll be finished before Pesach. After all, perhaps the non-Jew will go ahead and resell it to a Jew. So you have to make sure you're giving the non-Jew only enough material that he can finish before Pesach. Grain that has a leak falling on it. As long as it's continuing to go drop after drop, even if the water is hitting the grain all day, it cannot become leavened. This is a general principle. As long as dough is being agitated, being moved around, it cannot become chametz. That's why, by the way, I should say today we're familiar with matzahs as flat crackers. But technically it doesn't have to be that way. It's only because matzah became industrialized, they have to produce so much that they just make it the simplest way, which is crackers. But technically, if you're sitting with your dough, and the Rambam will say it soon again, and you're kneading it well, you can let your matzah turn into a nice lafa. Because you have 18 minutes till it rises. Knead it for 5 minutes, knead it for another 5 minutes, put it in the oven, let it sit nicely. Before 18 minutes, you can make a very nice pita or lafa. So that's one of the places where we see it over here. As long as the water is continually touching the dough and it never has a chance to just sit and rise, it doesn't become chametz. The moment the leak stops, im nishtaha kashir, it is a asur. If it waits the requisite amount of time, then of course it becomes forbidden. It's chametz. Yud Aleph, ein lashem b'Pesach isa gedela. We never make big doughs on Pesach. Now, another thing. Today, we all buy our matzah before. That's all we eat. Nobody makes dough on Pesach. But in those days, there wasn't any big matzah bakeries. Every house made their own matzah, and they didn't make just one day matzah for the whole Pesach. It would go bad. They didn't have fridges. They didn't have preservative, airtight stuff as we have today. They would bake every day of Pesach. So you have to know how to bake bread on Pesach. On Pesach, no making big doughs. Shema tachmitz, perhaps it might become chametz. Ela kashir challah bilvad. You only make enough of an amount that would require you to take challah, one of the gifts to the Kohen. When we need dough on Pesach, we never knead with hot water, nor with water heated up from a sun, nor with water that was drawn that day. Ela b'mayim shalanu, only with water that stayed overnight. And shalanu in Hebrew means hours. Here it means shalanu, that slept overnight, because they're colder. Here you have actually a picture. Even today it's followed. This is the Rebbe himself drawing water for his own matzah. He'd come out just before sunset, draw some fresh water, pour it into a pitcher, and that was the water used the next day for baking his personal matzah. If you transgress and you knead the dough in one of these ways, with one of these ingredients, a big dough or hot water, etc., the bread actually that's produced from this dough will become forbidden. It's considered to be chametz. A woman shouldn't sit under the sun while kneading her dough on Pesach. Nor under the sky, even if it's a cloudy day, even if it's a place where the sun isn't shining, because we're worried that there could be some heat. Never should she leave a dough alone and do something else, even if she would do so the rest of the year. On Pesach, you must be very careful. If she was kneading and baking, she needs to use two separate containers of water. One to use for smoothing the loaves, and one to use for cooling off her hands. She shouldn't mix the two, they might become chametz. But in this case, if she transgressed one of these conditions, she needed under the sun, or she didn't cool her hands off, or she made a dough bigger than the amount of challah. So I misspoke before. The end of the last halacha was only the cases of the ingredients, the hot water. But here, the Rambam says clearly, if she makes a dough bigger than the amount of challah, so any of the other problems, hapas muteres, the bread is permitted. The kamashir challah, how much is actually the amount of challah? How much dough must be made to be required to take challah to give it to the Kohen? About the size of 43 and a fifth eggs. We're talking about the volume of the egg, an average egg, not its weight. Of course, dough is heavier than eggs. We're talking about the volume of 43 and a fifth eggs. Today's measurements have it about 1.7 kilo, about 4 pounds. So it's a lot of dough, actually, if you think about it. A woman makes a small dough in her home, doesn't have to take challah. You have to make a dough big enough to be required to have challah. Yud Gimel, Kol's man sha'adam oisek babatzek. Here the Rambam says it clearly. As long as all the time that a person is dealing with a dough, afilu kolayim kula, even all day long, einei bali dechimutz, it cannot become chametz. But if he lifted his hand and left the dough alone, and the dough waited to the point that it reaches the point where it would produce a sound when a person hits it. It's already become chametz and it must be burnt. Of course, it cannot be kept on Pesach. That's how the Rambam describes the time frame. The time frame is leave the dough to rise enough that if I bang it, it'll produce a sound. Today we say it's just 18 minutes. That's the cap. If the voice sound cannot be heard, if you waited the time it takes to walk a meal, again 18 minutes, you can know for sure that it became chametz and has to be burnt. And also if the color, hichsifu either means became pale or whitened or it became wrinkled, like a person whose hair stands on end. In fright, it's forbidden to eat it anymore, it's become chametz, but we cannot hold you liable to excision because you don't know for sure if it's biblical chametz. Yudalet, hayu shtei isos. There was two doughs. Sheigbiu hayad mehen, the hand was removed from them. Person stopped occupying himself with both doughs. Niloishes be'es achas, they were kneaded together at the same time. Benishtahu, and they were delayed. They're waiting now. Ha'achas me'an yesh lakoil, va'acheres ein lakoil. You bang the doughs. One of them produces a sound. The other one doesn't. Shtei and yisarfu, burn them both. Barei and chametz gomer, they're both considered to be complete chametz. Since one of them already reached that point of producing a sound, even if the other doesn't have a sound, it's all in the same time frame. Treat it the same way. Tesvav ein oisin srikin hamitzuyarin ma Pesach. We cannot create loaves with designs on Pesach. Today they call this bread scoring. You actually can shape designs into your bread loaves. We don't make those on Pesach because women take their time with making them. And by the time you finish, they've become chametz. Lefichach, therefore, hanachtoimin bakers that are professional at this, mutarin la'asayisam, they can make these design loaves. Because they're expert at their work. And they do it quickly. But your average homeowner is forbidden to make it. Even in a mold. You aren't doing any work. You're simply pouring the dough into a mold and it will produce the design. You don't do that. Because others seeing you say, hey, he made a bread with designs. He doesn't know that he has a mold. So he'll do it himself with his own hands. The yishu ba'asiyasan v'yachmitzu, and they will delay themselves in making the design, and it will become chametz. Tezayin mayim shereichatzin bahen hayadayim v'ha'areva achar shaloshin, water that's used to wash the hands and to wash the bowl after kneading. V'chein mayim shemishtamshin bahen b'shas lisha, or water that's used during kneading. Hareza yishbechaysan b'makom midrain. Basically, assume that they're almost chametz. Pour them out into a slanted place, so they don't gather in one place and become chametz. Excuse me. Yudzayin ein shoydenes hamurson umanichin lifnei atar negolim. We may not soak bran in water and put it in front of chickens, because they would eat from this mixture of water and bran. Shema yachmitz, because it might become chametz. Aval cheltin lahen hamurson bereischin umanichin lifneim. But we can scald the bran in hot water and put it before them. Again, similar to the scalding mentioned before. You heat up water very, very much, pour the bran in a second it heats up. Now you can bring it to the chickens. Here too the Rambam says, most of the Jewish world already accepted as custom, not to do scalding. Perhaps he might not heat up the water very well, and you don't want to get into any problems with chametz. What you can do is you can knead bran or flour in water for chickens and feed them right away. Or put it in front of them while you stand there and supervise. Watching that you don't wait with this mixture 18 minutes, time it takes to walk a meal. And as long as they're pecking at it, or he's stirring with his hand, it's like treating a dough with your hands. The count never begins till you leave it alone. It does not become chametz. The moment the chickens finish eating, wash out this vessel utensil with water, spill it out in a slanted place, and now you avoid all chametz potential problems. You test. If a woman is planning to take bran with her to the bathhouse, she should not first soak it in water. What you can do is she can smear it, rub it. That's the word I'm looking for. Rub it on her skin as it is dry. A person shouldn't chew wheat and then put it onto a wound as a medicine, because the water, the saliva mixed with the wheat kernels will become chametz. You cannot put flour into charesas. Charesas we know today, charoset, as an ingredient on the Seder plate. But in those days, it was eaten all year round, and it could be very potent, and it also had chametz typically. So you cannot put flour into the charoset. If you put it in, you must burn it right away, because it's increasingly fast to become chametz. You can also not pour flour into mustard. If you did, it doesn't become chametz right away, but you should eat it right away, so it doesn't become chametz very quickly. It's allowed to put spices, sesame seeds, caraway seeds. This is the caraway plant on the left, and on the right you have the caraway seeds. You can put those into a dough. We're not worried about chametz being created through these agents. You can knead a dough with water and oil, or honey and milk, or smooth the tops of doughs with them. On the first day of Pesach, you can only knead and smooth breads with water. You have to use only flour and water. It's not because of a worry of chametz, because the matzah you eat on the first night of Pesach has to be poor man's bread. Only on the first night do we require a remembrance for the poor man's bread. After that, you can use any other things in your ingredients. In other words, I'm saying here, before in the beginning of the chapter, we're talking about creating a mixture which could become chametz. It can only become chametz if it has water. If it has only fruit juice, it doesn't become chametz. Here the Rambam is saying initially, can I make a dough with fruit juice? Yes, you can on Pesach. Except on the first day, don't make it for a technical reason, for a side reason, because it won't be poor man's bread. Now, in the last couple of halachot in this chapter, we move on to the laws of koshering utensils. And here I must point to a very fundamental rule when it comes to kashrut, kosher, which is kiboiloi kach peltoi. And the loose English translation for this is, a utensil releases a forbidden substance in the same manner that it absorbed it. That's how halacha recognizes. If you have a pot that absorbed chametz in the process of cooking, watch which type of process was used to absorb the chametz. That's the same type of process. If you now treat the utensil with that process, it will release the chametz. And so we're going to have a number of examples. First, we'll talk about kli rishon, a utensil that's been on the fire. So if you used a pot to cook pasta, to cook chametz on the fire, the way to kosher it is by putting it on the fire. If it was chametz in kli sheni, a second-hand vessel, you'd pour the pasta into a bowl. So you don't have to put that bowl on the fire to kosher it. You only have to put it in hot water that came from a bowl that was on the fire. In other words, the kli sheni, the second-hand vessel of hot water, will be used to kosher it, because whatever way it absorbed the prohibited substance, it also releases it. Now, we use this today in koshering utensils that are not kosher to being kosher, but the Rambam says we use the same thing for Pesach. If you have chametz utensils, people didn't have money to afford 2 sets of dishes, and you were koshering your vessels before Pesach, you have to do it in the regular way of koshering. By the way, most of the laws of koshering that we know today in Shulchan Aruch come from the laws of Pesach. Nevertheless, it's become accepted practice in most communities today not to kosher our utensils for Pesach. We buy another set of dishes. You don't kosher stuff. You just want to avoid any closeness with chametz in whatever way it can be. But we're going to learn the laws of the Rambam as they pertain to Pesach. Kol klei cheres. The Rambam begins with earthenware, clay, pottery utensils. Shenishtamesh behen chametz b'tzoinen. If the only usage you made of chametz with them was cold, you never put it onto a fire. You simply serve the chametz cold salad, bread croutons and salad in the bowl. Mutar lihishtamesh behen matzah b'tzoinen. You can use them for matzah, for Pesach, with cold food. Chutz mikli shemanichin bayas hasa'er or kli shemanichin bay chareses, with the exception of a utensil used for storing yeast and used for charoset, which also had flour. Even though they're also cold foods, their leavening effect is powerful, it gets absorbed into the utensil, and you do have to kosher it before you use it. It's also bowls that you need chametz dough in, and you leave it until it becomes chametz, it stays there for the full 18 minutes. They're treated like a yeast-soaking bowl, and you don't use them on Pesach. Chav beis. Biv shel cheres, she'oifin alav chalas chametz kol hashana kula, a roasting pan on which you actually bake chametz chalas on it all year round. Ein oifin alav matzah b'Pesach. We don't even go there. We don't kosher it. Just take it away. You don't bake matzah on Pesach on there. It literally has chametz baked into it. V'imilei gechalim. V'hisik makom she'em mevashel b'yachametz. But if you filled it up with coals and lit it, that area where the chametz was cooked, this is called libun, getting something to be white hot. That could be a koshering. Mutar levashel alav matzah, you can bake matzah on it. Because here again we have kiboilei kach polte. How did it absorb the chametz? It was cooked into it while it was over an open fire. What did you do now? You filled it up with coals, made an open fire, made it white hot. Now it releases the chametz in it, and you can use it for matzah. Chav gimel, clay matches or clay avanim, metal and stone utensils, shenishtamish behen chametz b'roischin b'kli rishon, that were used for chametz, hot chametz, kli rishon, first-hand pot. That means it was on the fire, exposed to open fire. Pots and pans. Some say pots and stew pots. What you do is, you put them into a bigger utensil, filled with hot water, fill up the water over them, heat them up till they release the chametz inside them. Because again, how did it absorb chametz? It was in a pot that was over an open fire. How is it going to release the chametz? By being in a pot with hot water over an open fire. And then wash it right away with cold water, and you can use these vessels for matzah for Pesach. And similarly, knives came into contact with hot chametz. Heat up the blade and the handle in a pot that's over the fire, kli rishon, first-hand pot. Then you can use it for matzah for Pesach. Metal utensils, stone utensils, wooden utensils that were used for hot chametz, second-hand vessel, not over the fire, not pots and pans. Bowls and cups. Put them also into a big utensil, but you don't have to heat them up in that utensil with hot water. Simply pour over them hot water. Second-hand hot water releases second-hand chametz absorption. Umanichan b'seichai ad sheyiflatu, leave it in the hot water till they release the chametz. V'achar kach sheitfanu mishtamish ben b'matzah, then you wash them and use them for matzah for Pesach foods. Chavhei, kol klei cheres shenishtamish ben chametz b'chamin, earthenware utensils, pottery that was used for hot chametz. Bein kli risha and kigain kederis, whether first-hand pots. Bein kli sheini kigain ka'ares, whether second-hand like bowls. Bein shayim meshuchin v'shuin ba'avar, whether they were coated and lined with lead. Sha'isa ke'ein zechuchis, they were glazed, made like glass. Bein shayu cheres k'moishein, whether they were pottery as they are. Ein mishtamshin behen b'matzah, we cannot kosher. Pottery utensils that have come in contact with hot chametz, we don't kosher. Elamanicha nachar Pesach u'mevashalayim, leave them after Pesach, and then use them to cook. Notice, in the last two halachot, it was only metal and stone. In the first halakha, I mentioned pottery because that was pottery used cold chametz. Pottery used for hot chametz cannot be koshered. Even today, that's how we follow. Similarly, porcelain or ceramics, they cannot be koshered. Chavav, kli risha, shiratzah leharticha. Let's say you have a utensil that was exposed to chametz over an open fire, a pot. And you want to heat it up, you want to kosher it. V'loi matzah kli gadol mimenu, k'dei leharticha b'seichai. But you don't have a bigger pot to put the first pot inside and heat it up inside it. You can do a workaround. Line it with a rim of mud or clay on the top lip of the pot, on the outside. Fill up this current pot with water till the water overflows over the lip. Heat up that water, and that's enough. It will kosher the pot from the inside. Then you have to wash it, and you can use it with matzah, with Pesach foods. And so in just 5 halachot, the Rambam covers all the laws that he deems relevant for koshering utensils. In Shulchan Aruch, this is developed into 2 whole simanim, 2 whole chapters. In the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, it's huge. Incredible amount of material related to koshering stuff for Pesach and koshering stuff in general. So of course, don't just take matters into your own hands. Consult your local Orthodox rabbi to be able to kosher your utensils properly, such that you have a kosher Pesach and in general a kosher year.